Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Inner Work for Greater Good. My name is Emily Eldridge. I'm the founder of ChangeLight and the creator of the ChangeLight system, where we do inner work that accelerates your power to change the world. So welcome to the show if this is your first time, or welcome back if you've already watched some of the episodes. Every week when I'm trying to figure out what am I going to talk about, it's funny. When I first started doing the show, I sort of had it all planned out. If you look at the episodes, you'll see I had it all planned out according to teaching all elements of the Change Light system. And then ever since then, it's been like what's sort of the theme this week, or what's the thing I've been struggling with or working on. And this week, I just noticed that I had a number of conversations, and I've had similar conversations in the past, but I noticed that I've had a number of conversations where I see people, I meet people, I get to know people who are really making a difference, but they don't realize that they are, or they don't fully recognize how much impact they're truly having, or even how in the past they were having impact as well, even when they weren't trying to. Like, it's just so interesting to me how those of us who are here trying to make a difference don't always recognize when we're making a difference, how we can make a difference. And also, I just want to speak to the fact that there are those of us, and I count myself as one of these people, and I know a lot of people like this, who we just know that we're here to make a difference. We don't necessarily know why we know this. It may come from some influences in our lives, but a lot of times it's really this self-directed thing. It's like this fire inside that says, I'm here to have an impact. I'm here to make a difference. But it doesn't mean that we always knew what that was. I didn't always know I'd be doing this work. In fact, I didn't really start discovering this work until 2009. So that was 13 years ago, and I just turned 47. So we're talking, 34 years old. So I was until my mid 30s, until I really started to get a sense that maybe I could do something in this line of work to make a difference. And prior to that, I'd been doing sort of similar things more informally. That is like helping people with their emotions, helping people shift their perceptions of themselves and their sense of purpose and value, et cetera. And, but I wasn't doing it in any official capacity. I was doing it, as a friend or a colleague. And, but the point is, I didn't always know what I was supposed to do. And I know so many other people who've had that fire, but they didn't necessarily know how they were going to have an impact. And what I find so fascinating is that a lot of times the way we end up having impact is by doing the things that come naturally to us, that we don't even realize is the thing that we're here to do to make a difference, because it's just so easy. It's just so natural. It doesn't feel like anything special because it is so easy and natural for us. And so I just want to say, I guess, two things. One, if you're one of those people who's like, I know I'm here to make a difference, but I don't know what that is yet, or I'm not really sure how, or I don't really feel like I am. I want you to listen to this episode because I want you to hear how you actually might be making a difference without even realizing it. And I'll tell you a story from my own past in which I actually thought I'd done the opposite, like that I really hadn't made a difference at all. And yet it turned out that I really made a difference, and I'll tell you the story. And then also other ways in which a lot of times we can be criticized and torn down. I'm going to tell a story about that, for the very ways in which it's our superpower to make a difference. We are making a difference, and yet, let's say the powers that be, or our parents, or other people in society really criticized us for the very things that we are here to do, our superpowers that we have in order to, that we have in order to make that difference and have that impact that we feel driven to make. And also, I just want to say, even to the people who if you already know, I know what I'm here to do. I know I'm here to make a difference. I think that this is a really important message, because a lot of times, and I sort of already touched on this, we don't always value what it is that we're bringing. We always think we've got to work harder or do more, or somehow, be more than we truly are in order to have a bigger impact. And I just want to point out, I'm going to tell some stories about that as well, where it's like, well, what if actually you are having an impact just doing what you naturally love to do? So anyway, I'm going to tell a few stories today, and some from my own history. But you know, these are some of the stories that came up this past week, and then I'll tell some other stories from my experiences and others about ways in which we've had impact and we didn't even realize that we were. And so, and then as usual at the end of the episode, I'll do a little call to action and say, well, look at your own life, and I'll give you just 3 simple steps. Look at your own life to really determine how you're having an impact, or how you could have an impact if you want to have more of an impact. And you know, and to be more to realize that you actually don't have to work so hard to make a difference. That's one of my other messages here. So first, I want to tell this story about this wonderful man. And I haven't been given necessarily permission to tell these people's stories, just because this just came to me to talk about this. But I'll just tell you very simply that he's an amazing man who currently leads an organization in an African country that's helping children who and their families, children who are very sick in the hospital. And so basically what he's created is, you know, kind of like for those of us in the United States, or who might be familiar with this, a kind of Ronald McDonald for, you know, kids and their families. Ronald McDonald House, I'm sorry, Ronald McDonald Houses. If you're familiar with the Ronald McDonald House, you know that it's all about trying to support, that those are, you know, places where they support the families, and I think even house the families of children who are sick in the hospital. Because of course, if your child is sick in the hospital, that requires long stays, and it can be a whole super expensive if you don't have a family member or a friend to stay within the vicinity. And so you can end up costing a lot of money with hotels, et cetera. And also there are all kinds of emotional and other needs that families have, and of course kids have, when they're dealing with a hospital stay, and you know, they're very, very sick, or they have terminal illnesses. So anyway, the story of how this man came to this work was really, really interesting, because he wasn't actually intending that when he started helping out in hospitals. He was actually more of a performer. And then he realized that that this was needed. And so he ended up starting this organization. But anyway, the point is he and I had a conversation, because we met at an event, the Wellbeing Summit, as a matter of fact. And we met at this event in late May and early June. And we instantly clicked. And he's just the loveliest guy. Anyway, he and I hadn't talked since then. So we had a long conversation on the phone this past weekend. And I learned more about his history. And it was, or rather, let me just tell you this. What actually happened was he explained that during the pandemic, so here he is running this organization. And then he said that during the pandemic, he was visiting this other city. And he said, you know, people need food. So he started a feeding program. And he was excited because he'd just come back to that city. And sure enough, the feeding program was still going on. So that was really made him really happy. And then, of course, I already knew about the work that he does now. So I'm hearing a pattern in this. And I said, you know what I'm hearing? I'm hearing that you really have this special gift for bringing people together for a good cause, and that people continue to stay and continue to do that. And they love to follow your direction in doing this good work. And he said, you know, I never really thought of it like that. You know, he just does it. He just does what he does. And he hadn't really thought of it as anything different or special. But then in the course of our conversation, he ended up telling me this amazing story. And I'm not going to give too many details again, because I didn't officially get his permission to share his story. And because, you know, it's, you know, anyway, there's no need for me to give too many details. But the point being was that years ago, when he was younger, he saw that there was some not good things going on in this powerful organization whose job was to do good and to make a difference. But he saw that there was some corruption, that there were some things that were bad, or just not good. And so he found out about those things, and then he brought people together to try to, you know, bring light to this issue, and to you know, alert people in this organization that this was a bad thing. He ended up basically, it sounds like, leading this movement within the organization. Now, of course, what happens when we start to, and activists know this, right? When we actually highlight injustices or things that are not on the up and up within a powerful organization, well, that powerful organization usually feels threatened. They feel like their power is being threatened. And a lot of times they fight back. And so apparently that's what happened with this organization is they fought this man and they fought his organization or his movement, I guess. And it ended up, according to him, really it was torture and it destroyed his life for a while. And he lost his job, he lost friends, he lost support, and he went through a really, really dark time. But what was so cool about him sharing this story is that he then saw the connection there too, where, wow, I did this similar thing where I was bringing people together and yet I was torn down for it and I was criticized and I was ostracized for it. And so the point is we ended up having this awesome like conversation about the through line of back then he was doing something that he just felt called to do. That's it. He wasn't like, it just was right. It felt like the right thing for him to do. And he was using his natural gifts and abilities and talents and skills and aptitudes and his heart to make a difference. And sadly, of course, as I said, he went through a lot of pain and a lot of torture and was ripped apart for that. And yet one of the things I celebrated within him was the fact that, that really did destroy him for a while. But then what did he do years later now when he realized there was a need for the support for these kids is he brought people together and created this organization. And then what did he do during the pandemic in this city where he realized that people weren't being fed? He brought people together and said, let's do this. And I just said, that's such an incredible gift and such an incredible talent. And how he's used it for good. And as I'm saying this, I remembered that actually he also shared with me, and this, that wasn't the first time he'd been torn down for bringing people together towards something. He said that when he was a kid, he was a real troublemaker. And he was doing a similar thing when he was a kid, where apparently it was a really tough school environment. And so he's like, so I would bring kids together, but it wasn't always for good. Like we didn't always do the right thing. We were mostly rebels. We were rabble rousers. And I don't think they hurt anybody necessarily. But the point is, it was so cool to look at that. And as I'm sharing the story, this is what I want you to do if you feel called to, is I want you to look at your own life and be like, what are the threads in your own life in terms of how you've had impact? So the point is that even from a young age, he was bringing people together, but it wasn't necessarily towards like a good cause. It was more, causing trouble or sort of fighting against, whatever the situation was at school. Because he said that they were pretty abusive and not very nice. And so he was acting out against that, he said. But the point is that aptitude, that superpower, that gift that he has, that just comes naturally to him, that he doesn't even think about it, it's so easy for him, is that showed up from when he was a kid, and then when he was a teenager, and then when he was, into his adulthood. And he was able to see how it was the same way we talked about this. It was the exact same gift, aptitude, superpower, whatever word you want to use, but it was just expressed in different ways. And that he learned how to take that gift and now he uses it for good. But what I love, and this happens all the time with change makers, is that it's there, it's right in front of them, or even people who want to have an impact, is they're like, I really want to make a difference, but I don't know what my thing is, and I don't know what to do. And it's almost always right in front of us. And that's part of the point, part of my message, especially if you're one of those people who's like, but I don't know how to make an impact. Look at what is right in front of you. What are the things that you do naturally, easily, effortlessly, that you don't value them because they don't feel that special to you, but they're so special to others. Like, for example, I know that I have certain gifts and I know that I can do things very naturally and easily. I don't even think about them. In fact, I was just having lunch with another amazing man who's having an impact. And when he was sharing something, emotional or sort of a recent change in his life that was, probably pretty big and catastrophic, I immediately went, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. And he was sort of taken aback by the fact that I was empathetic, and not that he was surprised that I was empathetic, but just more about like, oh, thanks. And to me, I'm like, but of course I'm going to be empathetic. Like, why wouldn't I? Well, that just seems really natural to me. And that might be something that's really natural to you, but it may not come entirely naturally to other people, either to immediately feel that or even to express it. So that's just one of those things. Anyway, so that's the first gentleman I wanted to talk about, the first man, and how he, in the course of our conversation, realized how he'd actually been using the same gift, but how it was expressing itself differently. And what an incredible power that is, because as I said to him, I'm like, that's not something that comes naturally to me. I was trying to point out that it's like, this isn't necessarily something that everyone can do easily and well. So that was my point, is like, I've got my other gifts, but I can tell you, like, bringing people together in like a movement, I have such respect and admiration for people who can do that, because it's just not something that feels natural for me. If anything, I'm always like, I don't know, will people care about what I care about? If anything, it's more like, I'm doing this thing, but are people going to show up? So whereas you have other people like him, who is just like, this is what well, let's do it and let's make it happen. So I just want to tell his story. And then another man who I actually just had breakfast with this morning, it was an interesting conversation in which he talked about how he has a business, and he's from another African country, in fact. And he said he just, and I'll just say I met him through another event that I attended, and the event was all about for people who are working to have an impact, change makers and philanthropists and people like that. And so he came to the event not knowing what to expect, but someone had said, here, you've got to go to this event. And he was like, all right. He didn't really think about it. But what's fun is what he expressed to me was that he suddenly realized, oh, I'm actually having an impact by what I'm doing. So in other words, he's been doing what he does, but he didn't even like think of it in impact terms. He didn't even think about it. It wasn't like the desire to have an impact consciously, not that he was aware of. That's not what was driving him. Now, it wasn't as though money was driving him or something else. He was just doing what feels good to him, just natural. And yeah, sure, I'll do that, and that's easy for me, and I want to do that. So that was another moment, again, that sort of led to my wanting to do this episode about how he suddenly went, yeah, it made me realize that, oh, that me just doing something that's easy for me is actually having an impact. Yes, it's having an impact. Are you starting to hear a theme here? I want to share with you a story also about how I'll just tell you this, that I, as I said, I've always been driven to have an impact. Not always, I shouldn't say that. It really didn't start to light up, or I wasn't aware of it. And my deep desire to really have an impact, that didn't come until, I would say, after I graduated from college. So not until I was done with school. And I think that it's because school had taken up so much bandwidth for so long. And, it was like always focused on school, that I wasn't really thinking about the bigger picture of, who do I want to be in the world, or how do I want to make a difference? And so when I did graduate from school, that's when it was like that calling, that need, that drive, that fire started to awaken, or I started to be aware of it inside of me, because I was like, well, if I'm going to do, what am I going to do with my life, right? Often after college or before we're finished with college, we ask ourselves that question, what am I going to do with myself? And for me, I realized, having, after trying a lot of different things, that I wanted to have an impact no matter what. I mean, I could do stuff because it felt good, but I knew that, I realized that needed to be a core part of whatever I do, is that it is having an impact, that I'm making people's lives better in some way or another, that I'm healing this planet somehow or another. And so the point is that I did a lot of things over the years. I volunteered at hospitals. I met my husband actually at Shriners Hospital for Children in Los Angeles, although we didn't get together until many years later, but we became friends. And then I met him. I did hospitals, and I was just basically helping out in a lot of different ways. And then when I was here, I moved here to New York, and 9/11 happened. And I don't think I've ever told you all this story. But the point is that I spent a lot of time helping firefighters and their families, and, really trying to be that emotional space for them. Now, I didn't think of myself as having anything special or different. It was just naturally started doing that. And I may have shared some of that with you, but I just naturally, when I was at ground zero, everyone else is running supplies, and I just naturally, I could just see when someone was really hurting or checked out because they were in shock, and I would just sort of take them. Again, other people reported this back to me. They said, I saw you do this, and I was like, oh, okay, I didn't realize I was doing this. Another thing here, that sometimes we aren't always aware of what we're doing, and sometimes we need other people to point it out. But anyway, so the point is that I then spent the next year and a half afterwards going to firehouses around New York City and helping firefighters. And I was known as the hugger girl, or huggy, because I would give hugs. And that's part of what I would do, is I'd give them hugs. They just desperately, desperately needed hugs. And there was nothing untoward about it. It was just simply human to human. I'm just giving you a hug. And they were, needing that hug. And actually some of the guys would even say, like, you got to hug this girl. Oh my gosh, I don't know what it is, but it really, really helps. So the point is that often when I would go to a firehouse, I would show up, and, there'd be someone there who was in pain, hurting, and needed to talk. And so I would go, and then they'd talk to me, and then they'd cry on my shoulder, and then they'd feel better. And there was some kind of catharsis. And then I would feel like I'd made a difference. Oh, good. I feel good now. I had an impact. One night I was at this one firehouse, and I went because I was trying to be helpful. And I show up, and guess what? Nobody really needed my help. Nobody really, not that help. They didn't really need my support. At least it seemed that way. And, everyone was like, oh, hi, I'm like, cool, good to see you. That was it. Like, there was no sort of like, oh, yeah, I need to talk about this, whatever. And so I left the firehouse, or I walked outside, I should say. And outside there was this lieutenant who was standing there. And I think he was smoking a cigar, smoking a cigarette or something. And we started chatting, and he was visiting. The officers will sometimes go between firehouses. And so he was visiting. So he didn't really know anybody in the firehouse. And he was just standing there by himself. Long story shorter, we ended up having this conversation in which we joked about flying off to Vegas. Like, this is like all this pain, all this death. This is all so depressing. What if let's just get out of here. Let's just go to Vegas. Like, ha, 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 and again, nothing untoward, just kind of like let's escape and go. What's the craziest adult place we could go to right now that would be sort of fun and free and forget your worries? And the thought that came to mind was Vegas. And so we were laughing about it up front and kind of joking about it. And then that was kind of it, and then, sort of like the conversation was done. And I said, okay, well, I hope you have a great night, and I left. Here's the thing. When I left, I felt like a failure. I felt like I had not had an impact. I felt like, well, that was useless. That was pointless. Why did I even, why did I go there? I didn't help anybody. Nobody cried on my shoulder. Nobody told me their deepest, darkest pains and worries and fears and wounds. And I felt like I'd done absolutely nothing. And I felt the opposite, like a failure, like I'd failed. Cut to a year later, I was in a bar, an Irish pub, because that's where a lot of firefighters would hang out. And I was friends with all of them. They all knew me. So it was an emotional day. I forgot exactly. I don't know if it wasn't the anniversary, but it might have been of 9/11, but it might have been something else. I forgot. Anyway, the point is, I'm in the pub, and I'm just standing there talking to some of my friends and my buddies, and I hear my name. And I'm like, but although I would hear my name a lot, I knew a lot of guys. So it was like, all right, no big deal. But then I see this man pushing through the crowd towards me. And I didn't really, is it kind of familiar? I don't know, but, and he said, Emily, I've been looking for you all year. And I was like, oh, okay. Hi, hi. And he's like, you don't remember me, do you? And then he said, we met outside of this firehouse a year ago. And he said, and we joked about flying off to Vegas. And that started to kind of go, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I kind of remember that. Okay. And then I started to remember, I was like, yeah, that's right. That was it's kind of a bad night for me. Like I didn't, I left feeling unhappy. And he said, Emily, you saved my life that night. And I was shocked. And he said, up until then, everything had been doom and gloom and miserable. And I'd lost all of these friends. I was deep in grief. I was having trouble with my marriage. He said, everything was awful. And he goes, but then you came out and we started chatting. And he goes, and actually, I take that back. He actually added, he goes, I was actually considering ending it all. He said, I was so depressed and so unhappy. And I just felt like there really wasn't any point, that I would never feel joy again, is what he said. And so he said, but then you came out, and we just joked about going to Vegas. And he said, that suddenly lit that spark within me again. And I realized that I could feel joy again. And he said, and it changed everything. And he goes, and I've been looking for you ever since. I didn't know how to get in touch with you because I wanted to tell you how much I appreciate that you saved my life that night. I was in such shock, but the point is that notice that even when I thought I wasn't having impact, remember, thinking about you, even when you think you aren't having impact. You might be, you probably are. I unwittingly, just by being myself and kind of being like whatever that night, and having this conversation with this guy and not trying to be there and let him talk about his emotions, but just having a moment with him, it saved his life. So it's all by way of saying that we can have massive impact without even realizing it. And here's what I always recommend. When people say, well, I want to make a difference, but I don't know how. Or if I notice that they're trying too hard, or if they're, or even if it's like if they're already maybe having an impact, but they are overwrought or burned out, or, need to kind of reprioritize or reassess, or feel like their work isn't fulfilling, or whatever it is. I always like to remind people that, number one, you can be having an impact when you don't even realize it. But that also that we don't necessarily have impact by doing things that don't feel natural for us or good for us. Things that may feel like, just not like a reflection of who we are, or how do I put it? Just that feel like too much of, I don't know if it's too much of a stretch. I'm not saying that it's not about trying to stretch ourselves, because sometimes we do, and our callings often call us to stretch ourselves. But in other words, that it really just comes back to that word natural. It's about doing what feels natural and easy for you. And that part of the issue is that we often don't recognize the value of those things that are natural and easy for us, because they are natural and easy for us, and because we're not really noticing that that's what we're doing, and we're not really noticing and valuing that it is actually having an impact. So very simple, 3 things. If you are trying to figure out ways that you can have impact, or what it is you're here to do, what's your purpose, what's your calling? I talk in previous things about that we are divinely designed to do what we're here to do. So it's not about trying to be anyone other than who you are. It's about being completely, fully, wholly who you already are, and trusting that to take you to help. Trust that will guide you to become who you're here to be. So number 1, simply notice, what is it that feels natural for you to do? And especially, what is it that feels natural for you to do from your heart, from a place of caring, from a place of just, it feels good, it feels natural, and it feels right. There, number 1, just notice. Number 2, value that. So stop and look at that. And by the way, I should say, in terms of noticing, you may need other people outside of you to reflect back to you who you are and what it is that you're naturally gifted at. A lot of how I finally realized that this is what I'm here to do is because other people reflected that back to me. And then it just took me a little bit of time to realize, like, oh, okay, maybe that is what I'm supposed to do. I have a colleague, a friend of mine who's, she's this amazing natural leader. She's incredible. And yet it took her years to realize that she was, because for her, it was just like, well, yeah, it's the big deal. Well, it is a big deal. It's just that it's so easy for you. You don't realize it's a big deal. So value that, value it, see how that makes a difference in people's lives. See how that has an impact. See, just value it and go, yeah, it feels really simple and easy for me. But you know what? Maybe it really does. It's good. I can use this gift in different ways to help others, and there is value, and people will value me for it. Very important. And then finally, 3, do it. Just do that. Life doesn't have to be a struggle. That's part of the problem. We think that life always has to be a struggle, or that we have to struggle to be something we're not. What if you were to just be who you are and let that be enough, and know that that's enough to make a difference? I hope this is helpful, and I hope these stories were inspiring for you. As always, you can find us at changelight.world, and you can contact me if you want directly, Emily@changelight.world. I'm out of time, but I love you, and I so appreciate you listening, and I hope that what I share with you is inspiring and makes a difference in your life, because for me, this feels good and natural for me to share these stories and to share these experiences and to teach and to guide. So my hope, of course, is that I can have an impact doing this, because this is what feels good and natural for me to do. All right. Have fun doing what feels good and natural for you to do. And I'll see you next week.